I was 16 and I was in high school, and there was this kid who was in and out of juvenile detention. He was really, really bad news. And this guy takes my glasses off, and I'm like, turn around, and I tell him, I said, David, I need my glasses back, man. Stop messing around. And out of nowhere, all of a sudden, I get this again, that terrible feeling. And it's like, you have to strike, you have to do something. And I elbow him, boom, in the face. They're probably going to call the cops, and David's going to get arrested. There was a switchblade that was open, found on the floor. Apparently, it belongs to him.
Welcome to the Awaken magazine podcast, where influential conscious leaders come to share the real stories behind their spiritual journey and how they're helping others awaken to love. I'm your host, David Trotter. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Hakim Isler. He is the creator of the PSI Games, essentially a psychic Olympics, where individuals who have psychic abilities get together in a very fun and family-friendly environment to support one another, learn from one another, and compete against one another. Now, Hakim is going to be a featured speaker at the San Diego Transcendence Retreat this September in San Diego. Mandy and I are going to be there. Would love to meet you there in person. Get tickets at SanDiegoTranscendenceRetreat.com. You don't want to miss Hakim at this event. Now, in our conversation, I hear about Hakim's journey from studying ninjutsu. He's a real-life ninja, to entering the Army and being a part of their psychological operations group, to then appearing on multiple television shows, including Naked and Afraid. Who does this? Hakim Isler does. Yeah. He talks to us about his belief in our intuition, our ability to remote view, ESP, all of these incredible abilities. He just believes that every human being can cultivate these gifts, and he's a personal example of that. And he shares with us about his vision for PSI Games, why it exists, and why it is so important to encourage young people to get involved in these activities. And so if you're drawn to conversations that go beyond the surface of spirituality, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the Awaken Magazine podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube. Click subscribe, leave a rating or a review. That's an easy way for you to help us spread the word about these inspiring interviews that we release each and every week. All right, let's dive into my conversation with Hakim Isler. Hakim, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks so much for taking time to join us.
Yeah, I really appreciate being here. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I am curious about your upbringing. And as you were growing up, did you have an awareness of, I guess I would describe it as a world beyond the five senses? Did you have any awareness of psychic abilities, intuitive abilities, spirituality? Was that part of your upbringing?
That's a great question. And so I would have to say, when it comes down to my upbringing and whether or not I was in tune or aware of any psychic abilities, I would have to say yes to some. Now that I reflect on it, at the time, I think I was very imaginative. My mom was really great at supporting when I would come up with kooky ideas of things I wanted to build or make. And we would always, do stuff for Halloween where we create different types of costumes and stuff for me. And I was always trying to make, spaceships out of cardboard boxes and stuff like that. But when I look back on it, there were several very significant moments in my childhood, being around 8 and 9. And around that time, there were three things that happened that I talk about often. One is that I dreamt the lottery numbers, and my mom and my aunt would play the lotto. And so when I dreamt these numbers, I woke up the next day and I was just like, hey, I have these numbers that, you might want to know them. She played them locally, but not nationally. They came out nationally and not locally, which was actually a bigger pot, so we would have won way more money if we had, played nationally. But what it did for her And kind of for me, now that I'm looking back, was let me know that I was tapped into something dreaming wise, and I was able to pick up on certain messages. Around that same time, she had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, her and my aunt. And I told them, I want to be a ninja. I'm going to be a ninja when I grow up. And they kind of chuckled and laughed. And she said, and the reason I remember this is she wrote a paper on it much later in life, saying, this is never discount a kid when they tell you, what they're feeling and what's going on with them, because um, she forgot about it. I forgot about it. And here you have like 11 or so years later, I had this very traumatic experience, and I decided that I wanted to kind of move away from where I was at. And I was like, what am I going to do? And I was like, well, music and martial arts I'm really good at. And through some really interesting synchronistic circumstances, I ended up linking up with a friend of mine I hadn't seen in a really long time. And I was telling them how I was feeling, and I wanted to dedicate my life to martial arts, and I just wasn't sure which one, but I was thinking Jeet Kune Do. And I told him about this dream I was having where I was like consistently fighting this character, and I just felt like this character was somebody I was supposed to be, and I was struggling fighting against that character. And he was like, well, you say it's a shadowy figure. He said, have you ever looked into ninjutsu? And I was like, what is that? And he was like, the art of the ninja. You should look it up. I think you would really like it. And I left him, went to the library, looked for a book, found my teacher's book. It blew me away. A few months later, I'm driving in a car to Ohio to check this guy out. And when I had this long, several hour conversation and got to train with him for 2 weeks. And I came home and I told my mom, yeah, I'm gonna move to Ohio and train to be a ninja. And she was like, what? And she was like, my gosh, you knew when you were a kid, you told me this and I forgot about it. And I was like, really? And she said yes. And so that was another moment in my life that I knew something was going to happen. And the last one, I remember being at a Catholic school, and we would play baseball. It wasn't really baseball. It was like everybody would line up and you would go up to the plate, and you get to hit the ball and then run, and then the next person gets to hit the ball and run. And so that day it had rained earlier, and we were in a concrete asphalt playground. So it was a very soft ball. It wasn't even like a real football. And I was about two people away from being in line, and I saw this kid drop this bat, and he picks it up and he gets ready to swing, and I get this terrible feeling in my body, and it was like, move, you gotta move. And I don't even recall like why, what, how it completely came, but I knew that I just had to get out of that space. And so I just switched my space with a person next to me, a few people next to me, and I moved down, and the person next to me moved up into my space. And everybody was kind of looking at me because they're like, okay, this line is really long, and you move out. You're only, you're number three. You only got two people ahead of you, and now you've moved back to like spot six or whatever. And that guy swings that bat so hard it slips out of his hand and it smashes the kid in the head who took my spot. And I remember just seeing blood pouring down his head, and I was freaking out, and everybody was freaking out, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs. And I forgot it, or I didn't forget about it, but I just kind of let that go. But then as I started to get into these abilities later, I started to remember these moments and how impactful they were and how they kept me safe.
Hmm.
How they kept me safe. Um, and the last one I'll talk about was I was 16 and I was in high school. And the backstory is unimportant, but I was in the auditorium, and there was this kid who was in and out of juvenile detention. He was really, really bad news, and he sits behind me. And I used to wear shades on my head, and we're all there for this award ceremony, everybody in the school. And this guy takes my glasses off, and I'm like, turn around, and I tell him, I said, David, I need my glasses back, man. Stop messing around. And um, he took that as a challenge and said some really bad words and told me to mind my business and shut up and turn around, basically. And I was like, no, I'm not turning around without my glasses. So he took that as further challenge and stood up and was like, I'm going to knock you out. And I was like, I just want my glasses. And then, it's not a big deal. And so he leaves his row, comes up because he's in the row behind me, comes all the way to the aisle, comes into my row, and he's now standing in front of me. We have security in the school, but nobody's doing anything. We're, so everybody's watching. And he's right up in my face, and he's calling me all these names, and I really don't know what to do. I'm looking around. I'm like, what do I do? Nobody's helping me. And out of nowhere, all of a sudden, I get this, again, that terrible feeling. And it's like, you have to strike, you have to do something. And I elbow him, boom, in the face. And I know that's not like great to say. This was many years ago, but I hit him. And then we struggle and they separate us. And we go to the principal's office. And this friend, Mark, comes to the principal's office as I'm waiting outside there. And they just pulled David into the room and they're talking to him. And they say, and Mark was like, bro, um, they're probably going to call the cops and David's going to get arrested. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, there was a switchblade that was open, found on the floor where you guys were at. And apparently it belongs to him. He was about to stab you. And I was like, it was so scary for me. Like, I was just, I'm like, what? Over a pair of glasses? My glasses? Are you kidding me? What are you talking? It was just mind bending. But then I understood, like, that was that feeling again that I got many, many years before with that baseball bat, where it was just like, you know, you have to do something now.
Mm.
And this is not, you don't want to have to strike somebody, but you have to do it right now or you're going to be dead. And so I did that. And so I go back to say nobody was there telling me about these abilities, but these abilities were very clearly there. And
Mhm.
they were making themselves known in my life, even though I didn't know to like pay attention.
Mhm.
So I would always watch these cartoons and think, oh, it'd be cool if I could like move stuff and all these other things. But really, I was living a lot of these abilities and didn't even recognize that was what they were, which is
Mhm.
why today I'm so adamant about helping youth grow in these ways.
Mhm. Just to clarify, that was not this David who was involved in that altercation.
That
Just to clarify.
was you are the reincarnation of now.
No, 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 no. Thank you for sharing those stories. My goodness. You have such a fascinating career path kind of after those periods of time that you were talking about. And if you could just kind of briefly give us the highlights of your path. And I want to dive into obviously the intuitive, the psychic capabilities that you have cultivated in your life along the way, but you've also been involved in so many other things that I'm sure they're embedded in that, but the average person wouldn't see those as kind of dovetailing. They would see them as something completely separate. So maybe take us down a little bit of your career path if you don't mind.
Yeah, so it really starts with that ninja, training. So before, when I lived in New Jersey, I was born and raised in New Jersey. I became a lyricist. Like I would make, hip hop music, and then I got into DJing, and I wanted to DJ like techno, house music, and so on and so forth. So I did, and I was pretty prominent. I would throw these parties, and I would have like I'd rent out like a hall and have people, um and it was really great. It was a great time for me, but it was still something missing. And so when the traumatic experience that I had was my friend, end up a really really close friend of mine end up murdering somebody,
Mm.
and it shook me and rocked me to my core. And it was over something just so ridiculous, where I was just like, if I'm identifying as this guy as my best friend, and we're a mirror, and in my mind, we're mirror images of each other, like, everything he likes, I like, and everything he does, I do, and um, And now, this guy could do something so terrible. Like, who am I? When am I, and what's in store for me? And a few years earlier, I had this issue with this David kid, and um, I was like, I got to get out of here. I have to do something, and that's where this quest came for. Well, what do I do? Well, I'm good at music. I'm good at martial arts. Let me figure out. I can do music everywhere, but what martial arts do I want to be? And that led me to this ninja path. So I went to Ohio and I became a student of the first American to bring the ninja art to America. He has a very amazing quest where he left everything and went to Japan and had sought out the ninja grandmaster and got accepted as his first American student. And it was just a really amazing story. And so
As
now
a
I'm
parent, as a parent, by the way, I would be asking, "Can you make a living as a ninja today? Like, is this possible?" And
that
you have made a living as a ninja.
Yes, that was what my mom's fear was. A lot of her rebuttal and her fear was based on, well, what does that mean for you?
Mhm.
You're gonna pack up and move to Ohio of all places. You have no friends there, you have no family there, you've only been there once, which is when you went to go and visit this guy that I don't even know, and nobody around us knows. And, and you're gonna do what? Train in ninjutsu, and then, like, what's a career path for that? I don't know, I just need to do it. I need to do it. And so now I'm there, and I'm training and I'm learning all of this. And it wasn't long before I became inside the inner circle and would go to my teacher's house and train with him and some of the seniors. And through him, because he used to be a bodyguard for the Dalai Lama, not only did I learn a lot about spirituality from that perspective, but we spent time in the woods because the ninja were wilderness people. And that was all new for me, coming from the urban jungle, living in, Newark, New Jersey, and in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And so now I'm getting that experience. And um, he would talk about his experiences with teaching or protecting the Dalai Lama and what that was like, and how it had to be. You had to be very, unlike some bodyguards where, like, hey, there's a very clear line. You can't cross this line or we're going to take you down. With the Dalai Lama, sometimes people through their love can be very passionate and they want to get close, and you can't just like choke that person out, like get off the Dalai Lama. You have to come at this with a very compassionate heart, even though you're there to protect this person. And yeah, that person could be, the Dalai Lama was not liked by the Chinese, and they could, the Chinese government, and they could try to hurt him at any time. So you still had to hold that barrier. So I found that fascinating. So I trained with him in that, and then I became a student at a bodyguard executive protection school and started learning there. And as I was going through that school, my teacher had another bodyguard seminar, and this guy came from Colorado. His name was Michael, and he and I were talking, and I was like, man, I've been really thinking about joining special forces and, like, maybe either becoming a SEAL or, going into the Army and becoming special forces. And he was just like, you should do what I'm doing, which is this thing called PSYOP, you know? And I was like, PSYOP, what's PSYOP, And he was like, well, the Army has this group, and what they focus on is understanding propaganda, and that foreign intelligence units would be using against us and stuff, and how to counter that, and then how to create our own. And he was like, it's very much like the ninja, like they were these guerrilla warfare fighters, and they knew about human psychology. And I was like, oh, that sounds super fascinating. He was like, it's still special operations. You're going to be in that same community. So if you decide you want to go to special forces, then you can, and you'll make it no problem, because you're right there with the good old boy network. You go through all of the same schools with the exception of a few. And I was like, man, that is beautiful. And he was like, in this way, if you get hurt going through their training, then you just go back to PSYOP and you still work hand in hand with these guys anyway. And I was like, okay, cool. So I decided I was going to join the Army and do that. And I nine
How old
11
how
had
old were you at the time?
at that time, that was 1990. I mean, sorry, 2003, 2 or 3. So back then I would have been like 24 or somewhere around there,
Mhm.
25. And so I I joined the Army and went into the delayed entry program, which was gave me a year. I already signed a contract, but I would have a year to get my affairs in order and all that stuff. And 9/11 had happened, and I really wanted to serve, my country. I had served my family and I served my community, but I wanted to now serve my country. And so this would give me an opportunity to do that. And that's what happened. I end up completing my training with my teacher for up to a second degree black belt. And then I left and joined the Army. Went to the Army, went through the special operations training for PSYOP to become a PSYOP specialist, and did that, and then went overseas, served overseas in Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom. So both of those campaigns, and was very dangerous, very scary stuff. We did somewhere about, it was very fast. My career was very fast and it's short, but because it was such a height of the war, I got probably 10 years worth of experience. We did somewhere about 300 and something combat missions in the 15 months that I was over there. And it was supposed to be only like a 6 to 9 month deployment. Um, but Bush did the surge, and then we had to stay, and we were having a great effect on what we were doing. And so we had to continue on. And so it was a lot of experience during one of the heights of the combat in Ramadi. And so did that, came back and was married. And my ex-wife said, "Hey, you have been in language school learning Arabic, you've been in jump school, you've been in anti-terrorism school, you've been in PSYOP school. We haven't even really been involved in our marriage at all. And so I don't want to do any more military time. So if this is something you want to continue on with, then you're going to have to do it without me." And I really wanted to be there. I come from a home, a single parent home, and many of the people around me were single parents, and I wanted to really see that that not happen for my life. So I got out. I was like, I'm going to get out, even though this was my dream. I really wanted to fulfill going even further. I'm going to get out, and maybe I could start a school, a martial arts school. So that's what I did, and started this martial arts school. And through there, a friend of mine, a special friend buddy, had asked me one day, we were sitting over coffee. He said, "Hey, you ever thought about doing things like Naked and Afraid, like wilderness survival stuff?" And I was like, "What's that?" And he told me, and then I looked it up. And he kind of did like a friendly challenge, like, "Hey, man, Black people don't spend a lot of time outdoors." And I was like, "What are you talking about? We could do this." And so it's just fun and him being silly, and I went and I filled out an application just to say, "Hey, I did it, but I didn't get chosen, so it's not me," whatever. And they called me like 2 years later. I mean, 2 months later, and they were like, "Hey, we want you to be on Naked and Afraid." So I was like, "What? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna be on Naked and Afraid. This is crazy." Um, you know, and they don't tell you until about a month out where you're gonna go. And then 2 weeks out, they tell you kind of the specifics of the general area. And I was going to go to India. And so and then it was going to be the in the Himalayan mountains in India. And I remember thinking, this is where the lineage of my martial arts system comes from, you know? So a lot of the esoteric tradition of the ninja in Japan comes from first India, migrates to China and Tibet, and then makes its way over to Japan. And these mountain mystics, they called them these monks and Yamabushi warriors and Shugindo and Shinto priests. They integrated with these ninja villages, and this is how this stuff came about. And so I'm like, whoa, this is really crazy that I'm going to end up in the Himalayan mountains in India, nude and naked in this forest. And so had this profound experience that changed me. made me realize that I had PTSD. Um, Special ops guys were very good at compartmentalizing and not dealing with, you know, certain traumatic experiences. And also, it was the home of this really main temple for this deity called Shiva. And Shiva is like this deity for transition and change and destruction of old and bringing in new. And that literally happened to me. A matter of fact, when I came out of the forest there, they didn't show this in the show, but the people were saying like Shiva. And people were surprised because the village that was there didn't know that we were off in the woods doing filming the show. So when I came out as this dark skinned, dirty, like hair all overgrown and, grass in my beard and, like 40 pounds I've lost in 3 weeks. So I'm this emaciated, skinny guy with this staff that I carved out of a piece of, pine sapling that I've been using for the past 3 weeks. They were like, is this Shiva coming to like tell us something? And
Mm.
and and that was super powerful for me. So I came back, and that started kind of this journey of doing more stuff with wilderness survival. And I went on several other television shows, Kelly Clarkson show. I did Kicking and Screaming and First Man Out, and did a lot of these shows, and then started talking on the circuit of survival, as well as doing things and teaching people about PSYOP and how to understand PSYOP in the mainstream media, and how to kind of overcome, the games that these outlets play with the people, so that we can unify and be kind to each other, and instead of trying to separate and not be kind to each other. And continued on that path, and then decided I was going to start a wilderness immersion school here and purchase some land. And I wanted to give people this opportunity to kind of get away and have the experience I had, where they can go into the forest and renew and rejuvenate away from everything, and then come back to the world as new people, or at least more evolved people. And that's what I ended up doing. So I own 100 acres of land here. I still teach martial arts. I have a 24-hour gym, and that kind of led me up to this point where we are now, where I'm doing a lot of stuff with Psi and Psi research and development. So I'm not sure how far you want me to go into that, but that kind of gives you a quick brief overview. I was a DJ, a musician, a ninja, a special operations psyop guy. I wrote a bunch of books, spent time in the mountains and all over the world, China, in the marshes, living off the land, and one survival show in the Fijian jungle and the Colombian jungle, and then in the Himalayan mountains in India. So I've done all that stuff. And so now we're here.
I love it. I love it. I know that is just like the rock skipping over the surface of the water. I know it's just a very brief overview, but I just want people to hear from you, this incredible journey that you've been on. And I think what's, so curious to me is, obviously you have this involvement in lots of different things at this season of your life, but um, for us, we interview a lot of people that would utilize the language of intuitive, psychic, mediumship, channeling, and awakening, and so much about spirituality.
Mhm.
And I'm hearing, you utilizing some other terms, like people probably have heard the term psyop in terms of the military, but also psi. And so we've been in existence as a magazine a little over a year, and we haven't delved into this aspect of the mind or consciousness. So I would love if you would just take a moment to kind of educate our audience on the use of this language. Like, what is psyop compared to psi, compared to psychic, right? Help us understand why you would use these different terms and what they mean.
Yeah, so this is a really cool question, and this is not one that I've gotten, I don't think, at all on any other show. And so, um, me looking into like creating this event that I've created called the PSI Games, one of the things that I was looking to understand was why PSI versus PSY, right? So PSI denotes psi as in psi abilities, right? Psychic abilities. And then PSY is like, psychology, so I'm like, what's the difference? And I was able to track it back to JB Rhine of the Rhine Institute, who was at Duke University, who was a psychology professor, and then he started to get into the psi phenomenon and ESP and understanding that. Did a lot of research on telepathy and things of that nature, and so he knew that if he started to write papers and things on psychic abilities, he needed a way to express that in these papers. And if he put PSY, then everybody would think psychology. So he started looking and he found the alphabet letter for psi in the Greek lettering, which kind of, denotes psychic abilities and things of that nature. And it's PSI and phonetically. And so he was like, okay, that would be great. And so that's kind of where that came from. And, sometimes there's a confusion because Psy and actually a video game that was very popular for me when I was going through PSYOP school was called PSYOP. I found it at a store and I was like, PSYOP video game. And the guy has psychic abilities in it, And so I was like, whoa, this is cool. But I later learned that, there's not a connection between PSY and PSI. What we did in the Army was psychological operations. So it's understanding people's psychology and understanding community psychology, like in sociology, and how that affects what people do and how they respond to the world around them, and then using that in ways to help influence or guide them towards different outcomes that we as a force, or as the Army would want to get to happen in that particular community or area. And then also our intelligence agents from other countries are doing the same thing. They're trying to influence our people and us and all that stuff, and so you have to do that battle back and forth. And so psychological operations really does look at people and communities from using the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which actually is very parallel to like the chakra system, And so you start with the base, and this is all about like survival and like food, water, shelter type stuff, and then you move up and you get to you start getting more into deeper understandings of self-esteem, and then you move to other ones where you get to like self-actualization, like your spiritual self, and people fall in these different levels. Another one would be security and safety. So you're looking to see where a person is. So for instance, if you come to a town where a bomb just landed, a bunch of bombs, and blew up all of the sewer, the water system, and all that stuff, then the thing that's most important to those people before they can listen to any message that you have is food and water and shelter, right? And then if you come to a place where food and water and shelter is a thing, but there's some outside force that threatens that, let's say maybe, like a group like the Taliban or something is coming in there and, beating people up and taking stuff, maybe that you're looking at that group and you're saying, okay, they're a threat to this community's safety and security. Or if we take here in the US, some gang is starting to take over an area, So your way in as PSYOP is to say, hey, we'll help protect you in this way if you can give us information or help us in this way, and so on and so forth. So it really is about understanding what people's needs are and where they are psychologically, and then using that information to help you, achieve certain outcomes. Now, Psi itself, that I think some of the overlap became once we realized as a community that the Army was investigating psychic abilities through remote viewing and other modalities like that, because John Alexander and people outside of the remote viewing program were still doing stuff. There's like the Earth Battalion group. They had a book on that, and there was a whole group separate from the remote viewing group that was exploring other avenues of these different types of abilities. And then you see all that come to a culmination in the movie Men Who Stare at Goats. So they took all of these weird stories about these different groups that were doing stuff, and then they mashed them into like one story, you know. But those were different groups. You had John Alexander doing what he was doing, and you had the remote viewing people doing stuff, doing what they were doing with Skip Atwater, and then you had the Earth Battalion doing what they were doing, and they weren't necessarily connected. So that psi, that PSI, kind of came as a way of denoting and understanding and explaining that realm of things. So that's the separation between the two. PSYOP you have as an actual military group that focuses on persuading, changing, and influencing the hearts and minds of a foreign target audience, and then doing counter propaganda. And then you have psi as in psychic ability that denotes like and connects to, you know, things like remote viewing and other aspects of training that were going on in these different types of units.
And why not just use the word psychic? Like, we'll talk about PSI Games in just a moment, but what is it about the PSI beyond I hear the original, distinguishing factor between PSY in terms of psychology, but is there a reason why not to use the word just psychic?
Yeah, so there's a lot there. One is that whenever you use a word that's been in existence for a very long time, you automatically get pigeonholed into whatever people have heard, mostly mainstream, about that particular word. And so if you talk to like Dale Graff, who is one of the people who worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he pretty much saved the remote viewing program. One of the challenges they had was when they had to go through a review every year to see if they can get more funding for like the remote viewing program. And there was just so much negative understanding about the word psychic. You know, if you come from a certain religious order or background, all psychic stuff is bad and it's evil. And then some people, if you come from a very rooted, logical framework, then it's all hocus pocus, and it doesn't have any grounding in scientific reality, and we don't want to touch that. And so it carried all of this weight, the word psychic, so they didn't want to use that. So using words like ESP or psi or then remote viewing, these type of phrases and words were better suited for you to be able to slip by that, what you were doing, from those naysayers or those people who might want to stop it cold. And then the same, if you look on the outside, you have people saying remote viewing now, which was a term created by Ingo Swann to basically identify. And actually, they debated whether or not it should be remote perception, because you're not actually viewing anything. If you're viewing stuff and you clearly see it, then it's called clairvoyance, right? But with remote viewing, the way Ingo created it and him and Hal put off and the people who worked on this program, it's more of perception. You perceive, you have impressions and feelings about things, and you write that information down. And so, or you annotate that information. And so that's what's happening there. But now remote viewing has kind of become this household name that people will say remote viewing for everything. Oh yeah, I clearly see a car doing da da da. I'm remote viewing, or I remote view when I do X, Y, and Z. And it was meant to really identify a protocol, and that protocol has an outline to it. And now we've kind of commandeered it and turned it into like a be all statement for anything where you're kind of gaining information from somewhere afar, regardless of the method that you use. And that's not why it was intended. So that muddies the waters and it gets things. Same thing with psychic. Now You might say psychic even though you mean a medium and mediumship, which is a little bit different. You might say psychic and you're talking about remote viewing. You might say psychic and you're talking about, so there's different things that people feel about the term psychic and what you're doing. You might be talking about prophecy, but then you're talking about being a psychic. Well, if you go to a certain school, they say, no, that's prophetic, and there's a difference, and mediumship, there's a difference. Um, and so again, you tend to encounter a lot of different baggage with different words, and
Mhm.
that could be okay. And for some things, and then for other things, you might want to have a specific word where you're trying to, you know, identify specific things that you're talking about. And that's where you might get into saying ESP, or you might say psi as a general term, to denote all these different, specific concepts.
Mm, mhm. And how would you use the term psionic? How would you utilize that or define that word?
Yeah, so psionic is an old word that was around in the 30s and the 50s, but became really popular in the 50s. And again, this is that same challenge, is that it got a resurfacing because of Jake Barber and his time, and that was such a profound interview that you have this guy coming out saying, yes, the government and people in the government and outside of the government are actually using these psionic assets to kind of like communicate with these UAPs and stuff. So they kind of had a resurgence of it. Before that, a lot of the military folks who had worked in these programs for many, many years before they were discontinued had no idea anything about psionics. And so I know for a fact, my teacher Paul Smith, he had to go back and like look up the word because he was like, I don't know what is this word, and so he had to get caught up to speed. And this guy had been in this field for 40 years working, this stuff, and so. And that went for a lot of other people. So the idea of psionics is your idea is like this ability for you to use psi or some sort of psychic ability as a means to connect with um, some sort of technological or some sort of advanced technology to some degree. And that's not what it was always for, but it is kind of like this union between um, the human or the human psyche or psychic ability with some other, you know, technology or entity or something of that nature. So it tends to be a little bit different. And again, that comes with all its baggage. There's what Jake Barber is saying it is today, and then there's what like it came out when it was in like comic books and books in the past, and what it was supposed to be. And so one of the conversations that I've had, and when I did a talk at Contact in the Desert, was I'm developing a word called cynetics, right? And this idea of, hey, we need to come up with a word that talks about all of these in a framework of ethics and has no baggage from others. So one person, if I'm talking to you about psionics and I have an idea that you're talking to aliens, but you have the idea that no, I'm actually engaging with technology that might be alien to this, but not actually a physical presence, then we're not really talking about the same thing. We just think we are. So, and then where do ethics that come into that? Because when you start talking about using these abilities, we really should come from a framework of an ethical framework. Now you're saying you can look into people's mind and you can, take over ships or vehicles that are flying around in the air, or what we call flying around in the air, and start moving them at your will. Um, it, we should probably come at this from a place where we have some ethical framework on what's okay and what's not okay, and then start building our words to have that built into it. Now that might be that might just be my quest, and it may not be worthy of discussion for some people. But just to kind of backtrack to what you were saying, that's kind of what I know about psionics, is
Mhm.
that it was an old term that we kind of resurfaced, and we're using it for in this kind of new way to some degree. and
Mhm.
it's become a hot term for people to say in their discussions.
Thank you. Talk to us about how you have personally cultivated your own remote viewing, or I also know another term that you can help us educate us on is mind sight.
Yeah.
Maybe what's the difference between remote viewing and mind sight, and how have you cultivated those gifts in your own life?
Oh, that's beautiful. So remote viewing. So my first remote viewing course, my first introduction to remote viewing was actually through ninjutsu. So the ninja had 9 abilities, 9 powers, and this remote viewing was one of them. But they didn't call it remote viewing. Obviously, it was well before that time. But they would say seeing things in a different time in a different place, and so they would look in on these things, and they were very aware that these existed, as well as the sages and rishis from India. We hear and read stories, and Patanjali writes in the Yoga Sutras about these siddhis and these abilities being present. And so my first introduction was through my ninjutsu teacher, and he talked about when he came back, because he was in Ohio near Wright Pat Air Force Base, Dayton, Ohio, that there was this guy who was working this project at Dayton, Ohio, at Wright Pat Air Force Base, where he kind of worked for this government agency, and he had these civilians fill out a lot of paperwork because he was doing research on this remote viewing thing, and he was like, yeah, he made us do this, and we had to view this thing and write down impressions that we got. And I was like, that sounds very fascinating. Little did I know, years later, I would end up being friends and meeting Del Graff, who was actually that guy, and I had no clue about that until much later. Um, but, I started looking at how do we get these abilities to be mainstream, and how do we also, I'm looking at these my kids at my martial arts school, and they're running around and they're doing this, what we call kuji, or they're doing these mudras with their hand, and they're saying these mantras from these animation characters, right? And so they're doing what I did when I was coming up, where I pretended to be Batman and these other characters and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and um, but I didn't know what I was saying or what I was doing. And I'm like, I would tell my kids at the schools, I would say, hey, we have stuff like that in our art that you can do. And they'd be like, show me. And I didn't have an answer to show them, because I had been training in the art for 25 years. And I spent countless hours out in the wilderness and these very experiential trainings with my teacher and doing stuff. And that really evolved me. But to tell a kid, hey, yeah, just hang out with me for 25 years. We're going to go in the woods. You're going to hate it. We're going to have you like standing in this one position in the water. You're going to be freezing, and you're going to get past all that. And then at one point, you're going to have this breakthrough, and all of a sudden, you're connected to everything, like, and they're like, yeah, never mind. So I want something I can do now. And that kind of opened this process in my mind, where I was like, what are we doing for kids to stay connected to their true abilities and who they truly are? And I started looking around at different seminars and stuff, and we really didn't have anything. A lot of the seminars and events out there were for adults. They and that's the and it's and I was like, wait a minute, this is crazy. So I was like, well, I'll just go and learn these protocols, and then I will bring them back, and then we'll integrate them. And so my first teacher was Paul Smith. I went to his course, fell in love with remote viewing, learned about the Monroe Institute through that training, and was like, I got to go to the Monroe Institute and figure out what's going on there. And so I went to the Monroe Institute, trained with them, eventually became an advisory board member with those guys. We call it the council now. And then I started looking at Mindsight, and I was like, oh, this looks really interesting. As a matter of fact, this would be a lot easier because the kids don't have to like draw and like try to follow a protocol. It'd be a lot freer for them to do this. And seeing without your eyes seems super cool. And I'm watching videos online, and kids are doing it. So
And
then I start.
what does that entail? Just so if somebody doesn't is it familiar with mindsight.
Yeah, yeah. So mindsight extra is also called extraocular vision. Is also called blind sight or intuitive vision. It's you being blindfolded or not using your eyes, and being able to use other extrasensory perceptions, or other perceptions, that sensory perceptions that you might have, to be able to identify or connect with this. And on very high levels, you will actually be able to connect or see this item object, but not through your eyes, through something else. And different schools have different ways of saying it. One school I went to, and I trained with, they were talking about is your higher self is actually looking at things, and that's why you can see them. One school I went to said it was your pineal gland, and that your pineal gland actually has like the photoreceptors in it, that is able to pick up on certain things, which is why even though it's cut off from light, you still can, it produces melatonin and serotonin, one to put you asleep and one to help you wake up and things of that nature, when with the cycles of light and darkness that we have in the world. And so you're teaching your body to kind of how to pick up on these vibrations. There's since been other schools that talk about, you being able to pick up on the senses through your hands, and maybe I've heard some schools talk about somehow you can smell colors and pick them up through your nose. And we don't know what, I mean, everybody has an idea, and maybe some of those actually work, and for different people, but we're still trying to figure out what's going on. But I know some people, including myself, have had breakthroughs where I do see through the blindfold 100%. That's not my norm, but I have done it. And there are some people who can do it consistently, and that's pretty amazing. But I've also done more what I call local awareness. Remote viewing is non-local awareness or non-local perception, you being able to connect with something elsewhere. And it's not you being totally there. That would be astral projection. So if I leave my body, or my consciousness connects to something um so intently that my consciousness is completely there and I have no awareness of what's going on with my body back here, then I have astro projected there. If I do that unintentionally, then I have outer body experience, because I didn't intend to do it. It just happens. It's spontaneous outer body experience. And then if I am bilocated, they call it, meaning my consciousness is here and it's there, where I can pull back information and then write it down here, then I am bilocated. We consider that remote viewing. If I am blindfolded and I'm picking up and perceiving things in my local area, then I'm using local perception, which means that I'm located in this particular area and I'm locally perceiving things around me, which is a lot like mind sight, but it's a lower version of this mind sight where I'm actually able to perceive things in the room, where true mind sight might be considered seeing through the blindfold itself.
Mhm. Thank you
So
so much.
yeah, I
Um,
hope that that's clear.
yeah, yeah, no, incredible education is great. So you have created an event called PSI Games. You just hosted it just in the last month or two,
Yeah.
and PSI Games. What is your vision behind this event? And maybe tell us about what people experienced there. I know you've already got the 2026 games scheduled, so tell us all about it.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking about that. So the side games came to me like many of these other things that I've had happen in my life, where it was like a download. That's the new term now, is download. And so it came to me, and it wasn't very clear at first, but it started, and some of it was happening with the encounters that I was having with kids and all of this stuff. But when it came as the side games, I believe I was driving and it was just kind of like there, because I do a lot of driving and I sometimes just turn off the music and I kind of zone out. But I also meditate every day. Most days. I don't want to say every day, because maybe one or 2 days I'm off. But I do a lot of meditation, a lot of meditation in the wild and in the wilderness. And so the side games start forming as a whisper. And then it finally became like an actual name and an event later on. And once it unveiled itself, I was like, I can't do that. I can't do that. It's too much. I have two businesses. I have, I want to one day have a family. I want to do this. I want to do that. I got all this stuff going on. It's no way. I don't even know where to start for something like this. It would be great to have an event out there for kids and adults where everybody can grow and they can start to dive in, but it's not me. And so I just kind of let it go. And this thing was so freaking persistent. It just did not want to go. It was like the gnat of my spiritual world, like it was just like wherever it was a mosquito, just flying around trying to land on me. And I'm like, get out of here, and it comes back, it lands on me again. And the final straw or the final moment that I was like, oh, you've chosen me. Like, I have to do this. I was driving in my car going to work, and I'm listening to George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell. They have a podcast called Weaponized, and they were talking to this guy from the DIA, and he wrote a book called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And that book, and he's describing all this stuff, and Jeremy Corbell says, "Hey, it's a lot. All this stuff you're talking about sounds pretty spooky, man. It's like, you're talking about interdimensional beings, and they can do all this stuff, and they can control their vehicles, without touching them, and they can communicate with us telepathically. And isn't this just scary? Isn't it scary?" And the guy said, "Oh, I see no danger here at all." He says, "I can't say much," and he hesitates. And I always say, I don't know if that was for effect or if it's really because he just couldn't say certain things. I always got to be. I'm always thinking from the PSYOP perspective. And he said, "All I can say is that if we as human beings can operate at our full capacity, we'd have nothing to be afraid of." And it was so clear. It said it so loud in my mind. PSI Games. How do we get human beings, our human species, to truly embody the depth of who we are in a way that we can prove to each other and to the world and inspire each other to the next stages of our evolution? And we have to make it fun, and we have to make it exciting. How do we bring the kids into it? That's how you do it. Kids don't want to sit in a lecture and listen to you talk about the science behind why remote viewing works or why it doesn't work. And you got this N and E factor and all this stuff, all of the weird things that you're going to do with your charts and all that stuff. And we've been doing 150 to 200 years worth of research, and we know these things exist. But the average person you talk to will either say, "Yeah, I know it exists, but I don't know anything about it," or "I don't believe that crap. They haven't proved that." And you're like, "They haven't proved it. They've proved it 100 times over. Why don't you just read the research?" I don't have time to read no research. What are you talking about? It's just going to be ridiculous anyway. It's not going to say anything. It's not real to them. But if you made something fun and exciting and inspirational and collaborative and community oriented, man, people will dive into that. And the PSI Games is that. Now I had people afraid, oh, you're turning this into a competitive thing and you're going to degrade these abilities and blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. I'm like, man, I can point to numerous tribes that have competitions as a means to strengthen the unity within the tribe. All the young men and all the young women, they get together and they play these games. And it's not because I want to say, "David, you suck, I'm the best." We're learning how to communicate better. We're building better camaraderie as a village. We're having fun, getting out some energy. We form greater bonds. And that's what we saw this year at the PSI Games. We saw people, even though they were on different teams, cheering for each other. Even though the person on that other team is doing better than the person on my team, I'm cheering for them. We saw that, you know. We saw people hugging and crying and expressing themselves in ways they couldn't do it before. I've had so many people come up to me and tell me about their child who they didn't even know could see with their blindfold on, now can see with the blindfold on, and they want their child to be up there doing the thing next year. Like, it's like, yes, this is it. This is it. every time we as a society have found a benchmark, and we and like the Bannister effect, a 4-minute mile. Oh, nobody can do that. That's impossible. Then this guy does it, opens the conscious collective to the fact that it can be done. Then other people do it. Then more people do it. Then we improve as a society in track and racing, because now we understand that, the track and field events from 50, 60, 70 years ago to now, they are totally the people. If you just look at the individual who's actually participating in it, their body form, the way they run, the speed in which they run, has taken off. Now, can it be unhealthy? Yes, because you have people doping and doing all this other stuff. We don't want that, which is why it's very important for me to also bring in the ethics. We did an ethics panel this year where we talked about the ethics of having psi abilities and what that means as we start to develop these things. And that's going to be very important. And that's what the Psi Games really is about. The Psi Games is bringing to the world these abilities in a way that it's digestible for the average person. It's inspirational and it's collaborative. We have all of these scientists in the room now who found people that could do these things, that on at who aren't afraid to kind of get up there and just do it. So now scientists are like, this is great. I can actually approach this person and say, would you partake in this research? Because before we had to put out a call, and then only certain people would come, and then they would be used to doing it in their bedroom with incense burning and their Sade playing in the background with their little sip of wine. And then when you pull them into this research environment and say, hey, yeah, you can't do any of that, we're going to hook up all these machines, we want you to do this, then they can't perform. But here we are now. We're like, hey, if we're gonna have fun, we're gonna be on stage, we're gonna have like lights and people cheering you on, and you're still gonna do the thing. And it's an environment where everyone wants to see you succeed. You know and that's super exciting for people. And that, what we've seen afterwards is, if you look at people's Instagram, people are popping up all over the place practicing the Psi games, putting in their tagline, I'm going to be at Psi Games next year. So they're really working towards embodying their full potential, their full evolution. And
Amazing.
that's really what this is about, is like, take that, let's all group together and let's all like really do something. um I love that we do a lot of talking and everybody has theories and everybody has stuff that they're working on, but I really need us to come together and us to have some common vocabulary, and for us to actually like see what we can do and how we do that to the next level. um and continue to push that. This year we had people do psychokinesis where they put their hand in a box and they had the Egley wheel, and they had to, the box was able to shield from wind, even though you had, one or two random people saying, oh, there's wind that was following their arm into the box, and then it would make the thing move. And I'm like, well, how do you explain that we asked them to make it move one way, then make it move the other way? I'm not sure, but I know it was the wind. Okay, got it. But we start somewhere. Just do it that way. Next year, we're going to do it in a glass enclosure. There's not going to be any way air can get in there. And then the following year, we're going to say you can't use your hands at all. You just got to look at it and make it do. When we say, can you make it spin right? It goes right. And if we say make it spin left, it goes left. Then we know that you're doing the thing. And we're going to continue to push the envelope every year. So it gives people a year to work on it and work on it and work on it. And what I hope is that by year 2030, we're going to see some really advanced people in these places. But again, every Psi Games event, we're always going to talk about ethics. We're always going to support each other in an ethical framework, understanding of like, hey, just because you can make things move doesn't mean like you should like, get mad at somebody and push them off the road, right? It's like, we don't want that. That's not what we're doing. Just because you can telepathically communicate or connect with someone doesn't mean that you should do it if they don't ask you to. If they don't give you permission, you shouldn't be in their head, you know? And we need to, just because I can read, my partner's diary doesn't mean that I should go in there and do it. That wouldn't be ethical. It wouldn't be respecting her space. And so I have to have those frameworks built in there. And that's really where we need to be coming at this from. And so that's the idea behind the side games. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to inform. Our motto is inform, inspire, and educate. So this upcoming year, we're going to do lectures on day one. We inform you. This is what these things are from the people who've been doing them for a very long time. We inspire you. We're going to play games. We're going to have fun. You're going to get to see some things that are going to blow your mind. And then we're going to educate you. Here are some workshops. Let's learn how to do this.
I love it. I love it. All right. The PSI Games are going to be held in 2026, July 31st through August 2nd at the Westin in Charlotte, North Carolina. You can go to PSYGamesInternational.com. I'm excited to meet you in person at the San Diego Transcendence Retreat, which is coming up in just a few weeks, September 27th, 28th, I believe, 2025 in San Diego. Of course,
Yes.
Suzanne Ross is putting on an incredible event. You are leading a session called Psychic Play on the Bay. We
Yeah.
are there in Mission Bay. So what can people expect from your session, Psychic Play on the Bay?
They can expect fun and collaboration and excitement around psychic potential. So we're going to just play these games that I've been working on for these events like this, where we get to explore in a group, in a community, these abilities and be inspired by what we find that pops up in these abilities. And we get to do that on this beautiful bay, and so it's gonna be really cool. We're gonna explore some telepathy and some telekinesis, and some remote viewing or let's say local perception, not necessarily remote perception, and some dowsing. So there's going to be so many cool things that we get to do while we're out there, and so that's what we're going to be working on.
Wonderful. San Diego Transcendence Retreat.com. We'll put all of these links, of course, in the show notes. And so, Hakim, I'm excited to be with you in person. And you'll be wearing clothes for Psychic Play on the Bay, right? There's just not naked and afraid Psychic Play on the Bay. I'm just
There,
clarifying.
there is a question about that.
Participants can all be clothed. All right.
Yes, they can. Or at least maybe I can fool your brain waves into thinking I have clothes on. I don't know. But yes, man, I really appreciate this conversation, and I thank you for helping me push this forward, this mission of bringing people together and play and fun and collaboration towards the advancement of our species and all of the abilities we have. And I'll say this as a last piece. When somebody just asked me this the other day, and it was just such an amazing, my response, I felt like it flowed from somewhere else. They said, well, why is this important for me? You're talking about all this, like they're not a believer in psi abilities. You're talking about all this stuff, about seeing things in other places and blah, blah, blah. Why is that important to me? I said, well, what if I took your eyes away? How would you feel about that? And they were like, that's a stupid question. And of course, I don't want you to take my eyes away. Why? Because I need my eyes to see. Okay, well, what if I took your hearing away? Again, equally stupid, he told me. So I'm like, okay, well, what if I told you that you only see a small spectrum of the world? What if I told you only hear a small spectrum of the world? Would you be open to hearing more of what's around you? Would you be open to seeing more of what's around you? Would you be open to smelling more of what's around you? And he was like, yeah, obviously. I said, well, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about we have a greater capacity than we've ever imagined. And that we think that only one offs, outliers have, oh, he hit his head and now he can smell better than everybody else, No, this is within all of us. Let's work together to bring that. And what would the world look like when we're all operating at these very high levels and we're all able to really trust in our intuition, not because somebody told us to, but because we really truly know that we can. and we really understand, and we've been developed to a point where we can trust that. Man, wouldn't the world be a better place? And he softened in his tone after that. And I invite people to think through that and use that in your own conversations, because I'm sure I'm not the only person having that conversation.
Hakim, thank you so much for sharing your story and your wisdom. Really appreciate it. Excited to see you in action in San Diego. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Awaken Magazine podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and our other conversations, would you mind taking a moment to leave a 5-star review and maybe even a comment on Spotify or Apple Podcasts? That's one of the ways that you can give back to the show and help us reach more people. And of course, feel free to share the episode with a friend. And if you're not already on our email list, we send out an inspiring email every Monday morning full of articles and interviews. Just head on over to awakenedmagazine.com and click subscribe and join for free. Our hope is that all the resources we share will help our world continue awakening to love.